gosh. All right, is it because I'm from No, I'm just kidding. I'm not going to dance. I am so honored and excited to be with Sisterhood all weekend and then with everyone here today. Thank you. Can we give it up for your amazing pastors, Pastor Kyle and Kara? Justice and I love you guys so much. I mean, they're dear friends of ours, but it is just so awesome to get to kind of do this alongside you in a different place. And Freedom Church loves View Church. We're always rooting for you guys, and we love you so much. So just thank you for having me. I am honored, and I'm so excited about the word that I felt like the Lord gave me for today. And it's about risk. And so that gives you kind of where we are going today, a word on risk. But will you turn to your neighbor and say, risk is relative? So risk is relative, and let me tell you why. We all, something that is a risk for me is probably not a risk for you, and vice versa. The person sitting next to you, that risk might be totally different than the person sitting on the other side of you. So work with me on this. So I am a native LA girl, born and raised, and I am Mexican. So I'm fourth generation here in the United States, but even though it is many generations, there's still a strong culture in the home I grew up in, right? So I'm going to make some generalizations about Hispanics, but it is okay because I am Hispanic. Kyle will relate, half of his body will relate to these stories. And in my Hispanic home, I feel like there was just this caution, this thing about health and well-being that was very protected. So work with me on this. So if you are Hispanic and you walk on a cold surface without socks or shoes, you can catch a cold. Okay? And this is what all Hispanics grow up believing and living. So if you have to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night and it's dark and you can't find your slippers, you don't want to do that because you could catch a cold, and then a cold could turn into pneumonia. And then pneumonia, you can die from pneumonia. And so we are very cautious. You can't walk on cold surfaces because you can die. Okay? So same is true if you go to bed with your hair wet. Like you might even skip the cold and go straight to pneumonia and then die. And so this is the paradigm that I grew up in. I mean, we weren't risky. Like Friday nights was TGIF and a board game. Okay? Like we were not extreme people. We were safe. We were cautious. So risk is relative. I married a Caucasian man. I love my white husband, but his home was totally different than don't walk on cold surfaces. So he grew up extreme sports. He wakeboards. I didn't even know what wakeboarding was when I married him. I'm like, what's a wakeboard? I don't know these things. My parents didn't have a lake house and a boat. It was just a different culture. And so wakeboarding, I had never been snowboarding in my life till I met him. We don't like cold. Mexicans don't like cold, so we don't go to the snow. And he rollerblades, but not like around a skating rink. Like he would jump off roofs and like spin and hold things and then land and put it in a music video. Like it was just very different. And so a risk for him is totally different than a risk for me. Okay, so early on in our marriage, I really made an extra effort to be a good wife. I've been married now for 13 years. We've got 3 kids. And but before kids, I really just wanted to be the best wife. And so I pretended that I liked snowboarding for about 5 years. And I, wanted to bond over extracurricular activities. But I told you I hate the snow. So we go, and it's New Year's Eve, and we go to Mammoth to go snowboarding for an epic weekend of adventure. And we went, and we were meeting some family of his up there, and I thought, it would be fun to take my baby sister. My sister's almost 10 years younger than me, and so I had to go to my dad and say, hey, Dad, what would it look like? Do you think it'd be okay if I could bring my sister with me on this trip? And he goes, Mija, why would you want to go to the snow? this doesn't, like, you're going to pay money to strap a board onto your body? You could fall off the mountain and die. And I said, Dad, it's okay. I'm a Coleman now. I said, half my soul is white, Dad. And so I will be okay. I will not catch a cold. I will not die. I'm going to have a good time. And so he said, okay, take your sister, have fun, be safe. And so we went and we had a great time. It was a few days up in the mountains. The only thing that was different at the end of this trip is I came home in a cast. I broke my wrist snowboarding in Mammoth on New Year's Eve. And and it didn't feel like a risk. You know, it happens. It's an extreme sport. And so I felt good. I actually had, you know, the paramedics sled me down the mountain. And then the ambulance came, and it was fun. But the painkillers were great. And so I had a great New Year's Eve. And everyone thought I was just fine because for the first 24 hours of a broken wrist, you have to keep your hand elevated. So I'm out on New Year's Eve. Everyone thinks I'm just having a great time, but risk is relative. And so I didn't know if the risk was my broken wrist or it was coming home to face my Mexican father who told me that I should not go snowboarding. So I had to go back to their house to drop off my sister. Wish I would have left her at home, because then I could have just showed up to my parents' house 2 weeks later and been like, oh, by the way, I broke my wrist. Not a big deal. But I remember coming home. He was waiting outside for us, and then he was so mad. Like, he's never mad. He's gentle. He's kind. But this was a day where none of that was anywhere near him. And so he looks, but luckily the anger was directed not towards me, but towards my husband. And he's like, what did you do to my daughter? Everyone say, risk is relative. Risk is relative. I wholeheartedly believe that there is a risk that God would stir in your heart. Believe that stirring would start today, or maybe it's already even started, but there is something that God would stir in your heart in this coming time. And the reason God loves risk is because risk requires faith. And faith is one of the greatest avenues that leads to a deeper trust in Jesus. And so God, his heart for you today is that you would leave this place trusting him even more. Amen. If you would turn to Matthew 25, we are going to look at a story about a master who risked on his servants. And so let me set this scene up for you. Jesus is around his followers. His followers are gathered all around him, and he's like, it's story time. Okay, so he's going to tell this story to a group of people that are following him, and it reads like this, Matthew 25, verse 14. Again, it was like a man, it will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted his wealth to them. To one he gave 5 bags of gold, to another 2 bags, and another 1 bag, each according to his ability. Then he went on his journey. The man who had received 5 bags of gold went at once and put his money to work and gained 5 bags more. So also the one with 2 bags, 2 more bags, gained 2 more. But the man who had received 1 bag went off, dug a hole in the ground, and hid his master's money. So there's a couple things I want to set up culturally that are super vital to this story. One, all of a sudden, this crowd is beginning to lean into this story because it is culturally groundbreaking. There is a master talking to his servants. See, this is a class society in ancient Israel where when you were born in wealth, you would die in wealth. And if you were born common, you would die common. And if you were born a servant, you would die a servant. There was no transferring of class. So all of a sudden, this master is engaging his servants, and they're saying, where is this story going? So you've got an audience leaning in, saying, what is going on? So not only is he talking to them, but he's giving them gold. And I don't know where your mind goes when you hear this story. Mine goes to like 3 little coin? That's weird. Coin. coin purses full of some gold. That's kind of the picture where my mind goes. That is not where your mind should go. So I want to make sure we've got some context here. The equivalent of one of these bags of gold today would be about $1.4 million. Okay, so this isn't a story about this master that like, I'm going to hook up my servants. Here's some gold for you. This is a master that is entrusting his entire wealth to these three servants. So we're talking about $7 million for one, 2.8 for the other, and $1 million. This is significant. This would never happen. And so everybody is on the edge of their seat. Let's continue to read the story. Verse 19. After a long time, the master of those servants returned and settled accounts with them. The man who had received 5 bags of gold brought another 5. Master, he said, you entrusted me with 5 bags of gold. See, I have gained 5 more. His master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share in your master's happiness. Let's pause right there. What is the character of this master? It is generous. It is trusting. What servant? Come and share in your master's happiness. I mean, that is not like, good job, gold star. That is like, come be with me. There is this character, this posture of this master that is rocking everybody listening to this story. The man with 2 bags of gold also came. Master, he said, you entrusted me with 2 bags of gold. See, I have gained 2 more. His master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share in your master's happiness. Why do you think that Jesus is telling his followers this story? I believe it's because he wants us to know that the things that are given to us, that he entrusts us with, belong to him. Let's finish the story. Verse 24, then the man who had received 1 bag of gold came. Master, he said, I know you are a hard man, harvesting where you have not sown and gathering where you have not scattered seeds. So I was afraid and went out and hid your gold in the ground. See, here is what belongs to you. His master replied, you wicked, lazy servant. So you knew that I harvest where I have not sown and gathered where I have not scattered seed. Well, then you should have put my money on deposit with the bankers so that when I returned, I would have received it back with interest. So take the bag of gold from him and give it to the one who has 10 bags. For whoever has will be given more, and they will have an abundance. Whoever does not have, even what they have will be taken from them. And throw that worthless servant outside into the darkness where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. And everybody in the audience said, yikes, right? Like, isn't that a little bit harsh? Jesus, this story took a turn that we were not expecting. Here is this good master, and this servant didn't steal the master's money. And he didn't squander the master's money. He simply did not put it to work and invest it in the master's kingdom. See, I believe that if we begin to treat the things that God has given us like they belong to him, our lives will look so different. I think it's easy to make a parallel with money because we're talking about gold coins, but I do not want us to limit our frame of mind to just a financial connection. I think that is too what God gives us financially, and we invest into his kingdom. He blesses. But man, I believe that the currency of heaven is relationships. God has given you $4 million worth of relationships in your life. He's given you $1 million worth of abilities and talents and opportunities. What would it look like if you begin to invest everything he's giving you, to treat it like it belongs to him. See, there was something that was expected. It was unspoken. He didn't tell his servants what to do with the money, but there was a built-in expectation because it was the master's that they had to do something with it. He didn't give them any instruction. That was already known. And I think sometimes in church, we think that faithfulness is fruitfulness. But those are two things that are very different. Faithfulness is good, and it is a fruit of the Spirit that we grow in. But this passage of Scripture would lead me to believe that there is an expectation to be faithful, but also to be fruitful. When you're faithful, you do things because you just do them. But what are you doing with the things God's given you? Is there evidence of fruitfulness in your life? Have you made an investment, and your investment, you're seeing God bless it and touch it? The thing that's crazy that I just realized is, not just right now, but earlier, is isn't it funny that both the first two servants, they doubled their money? And you can't biblically back this up. This is my theory. But I think God meets us and blesses us when we put some faith in action. And he's like, I'm going to bless that. There's double. Both of them had double because they stepped out and invested it. There was a grace on them when they did that. You know, our society wants us to stay safe. We have sayings like, what goes up must come down. Don't count your chickens before they hatch. You can't have your cake and eat it too. Build your 401k. Have your white picket fence. All those things are good. Those are not bad things. But I think where the enemy wants to keep the church is in a safe circle, a safe gate. Because when we are not moving, we are living faithless, mundane, boring lives that God had never intended for you and I to live. Church, he wants to know you more. He doesn't just want to use you. He wants to know you. And when you are on mission with Jesus, there is an intimacy, a dependency, a love affair that you've never experienced. But if you are living safe and boring and faithless and you're on a hamster wheel, you don't know any of those things about Jesus yet. That is where the enemy would want you to stay. Safe, bored, and faithless. I remember a time in our life where we felt like something was stirring in our heart, but it was really risky. And God told me, Maria, I don't want you to play it safe. I want you to play it faith. And I was like, okay, so give me more. And I want to, sometimes I think we're sitting in church and people are like, how do you know it's the voice of God, right? How do I know that this is what God's calling me to? And I think sometimes God will give you very specific direction for your life. And then I think as you mature, he begins to trust his children a little bit more. There's not a God in heaven. As a parent, I don't want to control my kids' every decision. I want them to grow. I want them to stand on their own feet. I want to see their dreams and their talents develop. But sometimes you want them to do that on their own. You're with them, you're for them, you're helping them. But we're not robots. God did not want you to turn left, go right. He will give us direction. But then there's something as we mature as believers where I think he starts giving us some options. And we get to make the choice. What decision brings God the most glory? If we are waiting for God to tell us go left, go right, we are going to miss out on a life of adventure and risk and faith. What is the heart of God? Start making decisions and dreams that would glorify him. His heart is restoration. If you're going to go do something that's going to help restore people to Jesus, I think that's a God thing. So anyway, 7.5 years ago, we planted a church. And before that, we had some stirring in our heart. We were on staff at a church, and we loved the church so much. But what God was stirring in us was very different from the church we're a part of. And so we were torn. We're like, God, what do? We went on an extended time of prayer and fasting. And the only thing God said at the end of it was, you're going to lead a church. But that can look a million different ways, right? We thought we would take over the church that we were on staff at. We got some offers from our denomination to take over churches that in our area, or we could plant a church. And back then, no one was planting churches. So we were like, okay, God, we don't know yet, but we're going to start answering and putting some faith to this call that we feel. And so we went with planting a church because it was the most risky. And we said, maybe that will bring you the most glory, so we're going to go that avenue. And I had to quit my job and move to the city where we were planting. And I loved my job. I got to work for the president of this organization. It was international, and I got to travel, and I got to sit in rooms with like amazing leaders I should never have been in the room with. And it was just, I loved everything about my job. So this was a big risk. And I remember the day I had to tell my boss that I was quitting. I had my letter, I had my speech, I had rehearsed it like hours the night before, what I was going to say. And I promise you, between my desk and his office, I paced probably about 75 times that day, because this was the line in the sand. This was like, once I quit my job, there was no going back. We had a 9-month-old. And we had to take care of him. We live in LA. It's expensive. We were going from 2 incomes to 1 income. But this was the step of faith we were taking in faith. And so I went. Finally, it took me all day till 5 p.m. And I knocked on my boss's door. He said, come in. I said, can I have a minute of your time? Sit down. Absolutely. And I pulled out that letter of resignation, and I slid it across his very large cherry oak desk. And I said, I'm resigning. We're going to go plant this church, and I need to give you my notice. And I was really, really hoping for like, yeah, you can do it, or man, that's a lot of faith. That's awesome. Something positive. Yet this was his response. Maria, how are you going to live? I mean, I had everything to lose. I didn't know where we were going to live or how we were going to eat or what life was going to look like. It was going to look very different from our current circumstance, but we were excited about the risk God put on our heart. So, his question was warranted, and my heart immediately responded with trust. I was going to trust the God that would entrust me with bags of gold. I was going to trust the God that would give me his spirit to work in and through me. I was going to trust the God that had never left me or forsaken me. We had so much to lose, but so much to gain. And God has been so faithful. And you don't know when you take a risk for Jesus what it's going to look like. But the thing that you can be sure of is he's going to be with you. That leap of faith that you take may fall flat, but you know what? You're going to know him better in that. And that is always the goal, is more trust in Jesus. The greatest miracle is that my heart trusts Jesus more. God has done so many things in our church. I'm so grateful to get to be a part of it. I think we've just baptized like our 1,000th person in 7 years. God's spirit and power has been moving, and it is all him, because we keep making mistakes. But my heart trusting Jesus on the level it does is the greatest miracle, I would say, in 7.5 years. The question that I would love for you to wrestle with is, where is my trust today? If you are hearing this message and you're like, risk is good for you, but I'm good, I'd encourage you today that there is more of God available to you. There is more power than you've even tapped into in Jesus that he wants to give you and he wants you to use for his kingdom. So as you lay your head down tonight, what is the thing that would lead you to a deeper level of trust in Jesus? So we have a couple in our church. They're amazing. They've been with us since the beginning. They serve their guts out. They open their home, their doors up to us for any meeting we ever need. They're in their 60s, and they've followed Jesus their whole life. They're amazing. They've raised great children that love God. One's a doctor, one's a nurse, and they've just done an incredible job. And I was on the phone with Valerie, that's the wife's name, and she was telling me about an opportunity that had come up at work. She works at a school, and they were adding a boarding school location to this school. And she said, yeah, they were like, Val, do you want to come be the on-site mom for 50 high school students? And if you're in here, and I mean, that's not an opportunity. That sounds like a nightmare, right? Like, who wants to live with a bunch of adolescent teenagers? It just doesn't sound like an opportunity. But she began to tell me about a word that God gave her when she was 14 years old at a summer camp. And she said all her life, every opportunity that has come her way, she's always like, is this it, God? And it was that she would take care of orphans. She's like, well, these kids aren't orphans. Their parents have a lot of money, and they have parents. They're just sending their kids to school. And God said to her in that moment, but they're spiritual orphans. And she said something of the Spirit of God rose up in her, and she is like, this is a risk. It's a big risk. Her and her husband are getting near retirement. They've lived out careers. They've built a beautiful life for themselves. And it's crazy, but I can tell you that in just 2 months, they are selling their huge, beautiful home that they've lived in for many years and downsizing 4,000 square feet to a 900 square foot apartment. And they're selling their stuff, and they're going to get rid of it all to take on the next season of their life as an assignment from the Lord. And I mean, that's crazy, right? She's telling me this, and my heart's leaping out of my chest. I'm like, oh my gosh, what faith, what trust that everyone, all her colleagues would tell her, you're insane. Like, you're done with that. You've already lived your life, but something of the Spirit of God and opportunity and faith all mixed together was like, let's do this. And it gets crazier. So they're doing this. But then she said, we're going to change our living habits a little bit. And I think we can live on just my salary. So her husband's a real estate tycoon. So everything that Rodney makes in this next upcoming season, we're just going to put in another account. And we want to start a foundation where we buy as many houses as we possibly can, and we begin to take care of pregnant girls that have nowhere to go. That we could change the next generation, that they wouldn't be given away or aborted or whatever, that there's a roof over their head, and then we can just surround these girls with the love of Jesus. Come on, church. There is an adventure waiting. It may cost you something. Can I tell you what risk is by definition? Buckle up. It is a situation involving danger, harm, or loss. So if you're thinking risk is relative, your risk might be going back to a family member that you've had a broken relationship with, and loving them despite what they've done to you. That could be the risk that God's calling you to. God might have some dream that he's put in your heart since you were a kid, and you've not seen that come to pass, and he is just waiting for you to take a step of faith into that. He might not tell you to do it. He's just waiting for you in that decision on the other side. God is with you, and he is for you. But can you imagine a world where your fear bows to the trust and the confidence that you have in Jesus? Can you imagine a world where you have this perfect peace that no matter what comes, no matter how comfortable you are in that moment, you know that you are standing on the rock, and and that you can just stand and he will hold you. He will be with you. When you are suffering, Jesus says, I'm in the suffering with you. Would you stand to your feet?